a little more deeply than I have. Dr. Kristine Nichols.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a scientist and a soil microbiologist. I've been with the Rodale Institute for just a few months, but prior to that I was with the United States Department of Agriculture, the Agriculture Research Service, for about 11 years as a research scientist, and for about 3 years before that as a research technician. I got my PhD working with USDA. And so I'm a data person, and you've got to be able to sort of prove it to me and show it to me and be able to show that it's possible. And looking at this and seeing what's happening, oftentimes as a scientist we see stuff on the ground and we see stuff that's going on, and then we have to try and figure out why that's happening, because nature does such incredible things that we can't put all of the pieces together, and we can't figure out what's going on and how this happens and where we're going to go from there. So it really is a thing where we've got data that is showing that it's possible and the potential is out there to be able to do that. And we're working now on figuring out all of the tools that can be utilized. And the beauty of this is when you tap into a lot of these natural cycles, the beauty of it is that this can be applied everywhere. No matter where you're at, if it's too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry, whatever it is. I've worked with farmers up near the Arctic Circle. I've worked with farmers in areas that are semi-arid to arid environments. And we'll hear from another scientist talking about farmers that he's worked with in other types of environments. So it's a thing that we can do everywhere if we start to apply these methodologies and these techniques. And so I'm going to try and elucidate a few of the things that are going on in the soil and how these different things that we can do actually can incorporate some of these activities that are in there to try and put some of the pieces together. So to start off with, we've got the data that is presented in the white paper, and again, these are from studies that have been done, and not just here in the U.S., but studies that have been done in various areas throughout the world. And as you can see from what we're looking at, we're able to sequester carbon in these systems. And again, it's not the same crops. We've got a biodynamic system that incorporates peanuts. We've got systems that have corn and vegetable crops. And so again, it's not that we go out there and say to agriculturalists, these are the crops you have to plant and you have to do it in this manner. It's, okay, these are the goals that we want to achieve, and these are the tools that you can use to go out there and do that. You go out there and you find the plants that are going to do that the best. You go out there and figure out what's going to work in your system the best. And that's really, again, the beauty of all of this, to be able to show this. So we were able to show here that we've got the potential to be able to do this from these studies throughout the world. And again, kind of taking a look at this in a different manner, you're able to see that we're able to sequester carbon in these cropland systems. But as my colleague Richard Teague, who's going to be talking to you next, can show, we can do this as well in pasture type systems. Oh, technology, wonderful thing. So that we're able to do this, both in cropland and in rangeland, and we need to have those two components incorporated in here. So as we look at this, if you look at basically what the data says, that if we shift all cropland to regenerative organic systems, that we have the potential to sequester 40% of the annual emissions, utilizing annual emissions data from 2012. So as Tom told you earlier, our emissions have actually increased. So we're looking at emissions from 2012, but it still is significant here in the potential of what we're able to do. And then if we also add to that the pasture lands that we've got and the rangelands that we have, we're able to sequester an additional 71%. So basically this is the thing, is that the data says that we can take 40 plus 71 and make 111. And that's that tipping that needle past 100%. That we're going to be able to potentially sequester more carbon in the soil than the emissions that we have on an annual basis, and try and bring emissions levels back down to the 350 parts that are needed in order to be able to have a sustainable system that the scientists have been talking about. rather than seeing us going to 450 or even higher in the very near future. So what are the things that we can do, and what are kind of these tools that I had talked about, or these practices? And some of the things that we've identified are looking at cover crops, or having a plant growing for as long as possible in the system. And Coach alluded to this, you know, the answer is sort of having a green living plant and utilizing photosynthetic activity. The more you have that green living plant, the better off the system's going to be. You're going to be starting putting carbon below ground. And what's really dramatic about this as well is the more that you have a green living plant, again, I've worked in semi-arid and arid environments, and kind of the logic is if you have a plant, it steals water, and so you can't have that many plants growing. And what we're finding is as we tap into these biological systems, we're better able to manage water and nutrients. And that's going to allow us to have better productivity in these environments. The other thing that we look at is having diversity in our system, having a good crop rotation. And then we want to have conservation tillage. We want to reduce the amount of tillage that we're doing in our soil systems, and that's something that we're continuing to work on, is figuring out how can we utilize these tools and how can we utilize nature in order to be able to grow annual crops, but at the same time do it in a manner that's going to sustain that soil environment, sustain that microbial habitat. That's what happens when we do tillage, is it's like a wrecking ball going through the microbial environment and destroying all of their houses and tearing apart their bodies. It's a very destructive process. So when we can find out ways to be able to do that, that's a very positive thing. And then the last thing is incorporating things like compost. So utilizing the waste materials that we have and decomposing that material and applying that to the soil and utilizing that as a stimulant for some of the biological communities that we've got. So you can kind of see this illustrated here. We've got cover crops in this system and utilizing diversity in those cover crops. We can put these cover crops on in the fall after you've got your crop in certain areas. So in northern climates we would do a lot of them in the fall. You can also do some of them in the spring or in the summertime as you go, especially as you go further south or towards the equator, so that you're again having a living plant growing as much as possible in the system. And you want to be able to, again, have that good crop rotation. I think of this oftentimes, I say this is basically if you have a monoculture system like a lot of our current agricultural systems are, it's like the donut diet. And we all love donuts. I love donuts. I'd love to live on donuts, but I know that I can't. I obviously do sometimes, but the point of the matter is that if all that we ate were donuts, we wouldn't be able to move. It isn't even just a matter of weight gain, it's a matter of we don't have the muscle fiber and the carbohydrates and everything that we need to be able to actually move and build our bodies. We can't build our skeletal structure or anything like that. That's what happens in the soil. When we have a monoculture system, that sole soil organism or the whole soil health starts to break down. And we're getting to the point where we have very unhealthy soils and our soils are collapsing and falling apart. And it really is literally occurring. We can see soil shrinkage. You'll look at various crop fields and where the crop fields are will be lower than the fence row that's next to it. And it's because the soil has collapsed because of that mismanagement and because of that being unhealthy soil. And again, we want to reduce the amount of tillage that we have in the system. This is kind of looking at some different systems. So you've got a conventional system and a no-till system and then a reduced-till system, and where you've got residue material and those types of things left behind. That's going to be able to, the residue helps so that when the water is hitting the surface, it has a lot less energy, it diffuses the energy, but it also helps to keep that water in place so that it's able to percolate into the soil. And when it's there, it's able to feed some of the soil biology, and that's what happens as well with compost addition, is it feeds the soil biology, and the biology makes those clods in the soil that allow for porosity for the water to be able to percolate into the soil. And you saw that with that fishbowl demonstration. That's those clods staying together. You want that to happen because when they fall apart, you get the fine particles that are going to fill in all of the holes, and you don't have very good percolation, so the water sits on the surface and it runs off and it takes the topsoil and the nutrients with it, as well as you have times where the roots will actually die. When you see plants in flooded fields, it isn't anything wrong with the green plant above ground. It's the fact that the roots are suffocating because oxygen can't get into the soil because there isn't that porosity, there isn't that percolation for oxygen as well as the percolation for water in that system. And utilizing compost, as I said, it can sort of act as it's a way of utilizing our waste, enabling that to go back into the soil happen much more quickly, so that you're able to get that into that soil and be able to utilize that as a resource. So, as Coach kind of talked about this whole idea of what we've got here, and Tom sort of alluded to this as well, we need to tap into the greatest solar-powered system ever created, and that's having a living plant. This is what we need to do. Soil is the solution to this problem. So if we tap into having a living plant, as was said, we take light energy and carbon dioxide, and we transform that. The plant will transform that into oxygen and those simple sugars. That's what C6H6 or H12O6 is the chemical formula for simple sugar. And that carbon that's in there, that provides the building blocks for almost all life on planet Earth. We are carbon-based. All of the organisms are carbon-based. The way that carbon gets into us and all of them is through this photosynthetic process. Every cell in your body, every enzyme that you produce, all of your proteins, all of that kind of stuff is a carbon backbone structure. So all of the energy and all of the structural framework for almost all life on planet Earth relies upon this process. And if we can tap into this process and enhance it and utilize it more efficiently, we're going to be starting to bank carbon in the soil. And that's what the bottom represents, is the money bags. That's your cash in there. That's what you want to have, is you start putting soil into that bank. That's going to allow for these systems to occur, where we're utilizing, this is below ground, what's happening. You have the roots that are in there, and then you have these fungal hyphae. They're called mycorrhizal fungi, and if you look in the white paper, it'll discuss the mycorrhizal fungi. These fungal hyphae, those are those white threads that are sticking out from the roots and going out into the soil. And those threads, that fungus is able to go out there and it picks up, the larger blue ones are water, and the smaller ones, and that just is nutrients, just in general. And they're able to pick up the water and the nutrients and transport that back to the plant. Nature has evolved this highly efficient process to do this. And we can tap into this most efficient nutrient and water delivery system. So at the same time that we're sequestering carbon and reducing the amount of carbon that we have in the atmosphere, we're automatically reducing the amount of emissions that come from the agricultural industry, that come from these production systems, because we won't have to use as much water for irrigation. So we won't have the emissions that come from that. We won't have to use as much of the synthetic nutrients that we're currently using, because we can utilize the nutrients and the potential that's in the soil. So if we start tapping into the potential of the soil, the power of that is just incredible. And it will, again, automatically reduce the amount of emissions that we have in the system. So not only sequester emissions, but reduce emissions at the same time. The other thing with having this highly efficient system, again, this has evolved over time. These relationships work together, and there's multi-layers to this. There's bacteria and microscopic insects, microarthropods, all of these different organisms involved in a lot of this process. So I'm sort of giving you sort of a snapshot of something, and I don't want you to underestimate the power of this, because when you think about it, in a handful of healthy soil, there are more organisms than the number of people who have ever lived on planet Earth. And again, those are all carbon-based, so we need to be able to get this energy in there. And what this does is it creates one of the most resilient and redundant systems, so that when there are drought conditions or when there are adverse conditions, the system is better able to respond. I'm going to turn it over to Coach for a sort of final message on this part of it.
Thank you, Chris. So quickly, I just want to recap here. The answer is really simple, and we have to look at climate change now differently. It's a gift. It's our wake-up call. It's not too late. We do have time to make a change, but that's what has to occur. So what is next? I've decided to take our message and our white paper to Washington, D.C. And I'll show you exactly how we're going to do that.
It's a very naughty wireless, isn't it?
It's persistent. We're almost done, so we can just get it through the next.
The Rodale Institute has proven that regenerative organic agriculture can reverse climate change chaos, but now with your help, it can be part of the solution. The solution is a global transition to regenerative organic agriculture, which means working with nature to use photosynthesis and healthy soil biology to draw down greenhouse gases. On October 1st, 2014, about 16 days and 10 miles a day. Along the walk, I'll be with farmers, the stewards of the soil. I'll be talking with people who are reconnecting our food system. While in Washington, D.C., I'll hand deliver copies of our study to decision makers and ask how we can help change policies toward an organic planet. But I can't do this alone. Rodale Institute can't do it alone. Please lend us your voice and spread this vision of an organic planet. There is hope. We can reverse climate chaos through regenerative organic farming, and the time to do it is now.
At least we've got to see a good set of legs at the bottom of the screen.
Same shoes.
Thank you very much, Rodale.